Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I am here with Nate Atkins as always. It is maybe the last truly hot day in Indianapolis, and I don't think it has anything to do with the meteorology of it all. I think it has to do with Colts fans' reaction to the way the Colts have played so far. It's been pretty hot around here, and deservedly so after the way they played in the first two games. Nate, did you bring a prop?
I did not.
No mascot from Nate again.
I will deliver.
Nate has given up on the season.
Yeah.
And the podcast.
I pulled a Jacksonville. I had a plan and then I didn't show up. So what do you got?
I did bring one. Brought a what I assume the liquor cabinet of most Colts fans looks like. Half-drunk bottle of bourbon. And this is Old Forester 1920 Prohibition style, so it's 115 proof. So I know it's not Blanton's or Weller, but those are the kind of bourbons you say for when you're having a good time. Like, this is the kind of bourbon you drink when you just watch the Colts lose 24-0. I actually assume most Colts fans have already been through several of these bottles in the last 2 weeks, and they're moving on to other ones. They've had to go back and stock up.
There were probably some halftime runs to the liquor store. Like, at least that's one part of the state that had to have benefited from whatever that was they put on. I
have more faith in Colts fans than that. I think they were probably ready. They probably didn't have to go to the store until the next morning. They probably didn't have to go to the store until the next morning. But, I mean, I couldn't do that in one sitting. Not possible. Not without dying. But, there might be Colts fans out there who are upset enough to do it.
Well, based on the way things look right now, I think they'll have other uses for it this season. This won't be the last time that they need to indulge and wash the pain away.
Well, if they want to light something on fire, though, I would say use lighter fluid or something. Like, just drink your alcohol. Don't waste your alcohol money on.
That's true.
On burning things, unless you really, 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 really just don't have any other option. Anyway, so that's our prop. I might set this one back down. I don't know if we're going to put this one up in the middle. Not unless I get an Old Forester sponsorship. Then it'll go up the whole time.
It is not where I thought we'd be in week 3 of the season, though. So
No. I mean, we talked about this on the last podcast, but just very wrong about where this team was headed, what they could do. Every offseason move that they've made has gone wrong. And as we look forward at the Chiefs game, I'm just thinking yesterday, and as we were talking to the coordinators about how some of their weaknesses, they just look really vulnerable against a team like the Chiefs. I mean, the defense can't handle quick game, which, for those who don't know, who aren't as into the football lingo, quick game is essentially just either a shotgun snap in an RPO where it's the ball's out quick, or a 3-step drop and the ball's out quick. It's essentially self-explanatory. It's the ball is coming out quick, and the Colts haven't done anything to stop that through the first 2 weeks. Davis Mills was in the top 5 or 6 of fastest quarterbacks in week 1. Trevor Lawrence was much faster in week 2 than he was in week 1 in terms of getting the ball out.
That's how you go 25 of 30.
And I mean, you're not going to get a pass rush, really. I mean, they haven't. I don't know that they've done a very good job in the pass rush, but when you're letting teams get the ball out that quickly, it's not going to be. You're not going to have any pass rush, and I mean, a lot of it falls on the secondary. This press coverage that we were told to expect from this defense has not materialized beyond 4 or 5 yards.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is asking all the pass rushers kind of why this isn't working, where they had 3 pressures on Trevor Lawrence, which is the pressure rate's the lowest he's ever faced in his career, and they all just said, like, did you watch the throws? Like, it was 3-step drop throw, and every time it was completed. So offense gets in a rhythm that way. So worst thing for a defense, and then they're in a humid Jacksonville and so they're rotating guys, and it doesn't really matter if they rotate guys in defensive line if those guys on the outside are so open. So it is weird. Like, we've talked ever since the game ended about the things we were wrong on, and when I went back and watched the film, a lot of the stuff, I think, like I said after the game, a lot of it's I didn't give enough concern to some of the weak areas and the new players. Most of it is still that. I'm not watching it and finding a lot of players I thought were good that I think are suddenly not good. But there were some things that we were led to believe were going to happen that are just not happening. And I think the press coverage on the outside, to me, is the number one thing. Is I really thought that there would be this mix between, you've brought in Yannick Ngakoue to run the Leo. We know what he's off the edge. Kwity Paye's in a better spot on the right end. You got DeForest Buckner, who whenever he gets a one-on-one matchup can just walk your guard into the lap of the quarterback. And there's this idea if you mix that with press coverage, that at least if you can guard the early part of the route, that pass rush would have a chance to make up for it. It was a little risky because if they don't get home, then guys are running free against single high safety looks. But the problem is it's the opposite of that, where they just bail on that press coverage technique, drop back, and it's like the Jaguars knew that was going to happen, and that's like credit to Doug Peterson and Press Taylor, scouting this team out. They just seem to know that they may give a look like they're going to do press coverage, but they're not doing it at all, and the lack of adjustment throughout the game was troubling. I think that's where it goes back to the preparation. I think just wasn't there. You can't fall back on your training if you didn't train properly. And this is just the issues that they're dealing with on defense right now, where they had 2 days of practice last week. Kenny Moore was not out there for much of it because he was dealing with the hip injury. And they haven't drilled it enough in practice to then try and just redo it in a game setting when it was fast and chaotic was not the time to fix it. So they have to fix that this week with practice, and can't look like that again because guys like Yannick Ngakoue don't matter if it's just going to be 3-step drop.
Andy Reid is going to be salivating too, because if you look at the Chiefs' first 2 games, the first game of the year they blew out Arizona. Mahomes looked unstoppable like he often does, and he was getting the ball out very fast. I think it was 2.55 seconds, something like that. Another one of the fastest times in the league. Last week, the Chargers made him hold the ball longer, and it took their offense longer to get going. So if you're giving up the quick game to the Chiefs, you're essentially giving up the entire game, because if they have that, they just don't need to do anything else. Outside of one 37-yard run by James Robinson, the run defense has been pretty good, but it doesn't matter because they could just go quick game on second down, fire out 7 or 8 yards, and then it's 3rd and 2, and you can run a quick game again on 3rd down. It makes the game very easy if you don't do stuff to take that kind of thing away, especially from really good quarterbacks, which they haven't faced yet. They haven't faced a proven really good quarterback yet. They're about to, and they're about to face Andy Reid. And this Chiefs passing game without Tyreek Hill is probably better suited to it. It's better suited to the quick game. They've already had to move that way because of the shells teams were playing and everything, the umbrella coverage over the top. The Chiefs have already moved that way. That was one thing that I thought about, the coordinator interviews with Gus Bradley. There was some suggestion that dealing with quick game won't matter as much this week. Yes, it will. Yeah, it will. Through 2 weeks, Patrick Mahomes is 11th in the league in getting the ball out quick, and he was very fast the first week. The Chargers did some stuff to keep them from doing that. So it's going to matter a ton. And if not, you're in a rough spot against this offense.
You are, and that's why it's a very tough matchup, is they have that quick game base to kill you if that's how you're going to play, but they're also an explosive offense. And I think they're less explosive without Tyreek Hill, but they're still could be really, really explosive. You think about, so far that's what's weird, and that's why it's been hard to process the struggles for this team, is I thought if this defense was going to struggle, it was more likely that they were going to give up big plays, because that is the risk of single high safety. They've not done that so far. And I thought the run defense would be worse. They've stopped the run, and for the most part, and they have eliminated explosive plays. They just
only 4 passing plays of 20 yards or more so far.
How much? I'm not ready to chalk that up as a win for them either, because they're facing Davis Mills and Trevor Lawrence. None of the receivers, tight ends they're facing are these explosive types outside of Brandon Cooks has a lot of speed. But that's really it as far as like a guy, a playmaker who's going to kill you. This week, the Chiefs have, a super fast player in McCall Hardman, and then they've got Travis Kelce, who has torched guys in bad coverage for a long time. And you look at some of the plays the tight ends have gotten loose for against the Colts the past couple of weeks. If that's Travis Kelce, it's a lot worse than it looks. So this is where it's interesting. Patrick Mahomes has such a great track record against single high safeties. And Gus Bradley didn't love when I brought that up, and I'm not trying to make it about Gus Bradley.
240-point performances against Bradley last season.
Yeah. And 17 touchdowns and 2 picks against him in his career. And you look through the games they've played, I know why Bradley's saying it. They did have 2 games when he was at the Chargers in 2019 that really frustrated Mahomes. It's some of his worst games. But those were kind of 2 outlier games. Everything else Mahomes has been very, very good on. What they tend to do well is he doesn't complete as many passes. They do have their wins in coverage, but they don't force turnovers against him. And they have given up some explosive plays along the way. So it's a challenge this week. It's just one of those where, like, it's like we said on Monday night, though, they can practice it better. They can dial in on the details better, but some guys have to make plays at some point. And I don't know if that's getting Shaquille Leonard back. It feels like once a game they could use him punching the ball out or picking off a pass across the middle.
They could have used it like 6 times last week.
Yeah, it's got to be DeForest Buckner has got to blow up a couple plays here. They got to have Kenny, like, 3 passes defended?
3 passes defended for defensive backs the first 2 weeks.
Yeah. They're just not even coming close to those game-changing plays. And that's if there's a route to beating the Chiefs, they will have to do something different. They're either going to have to score on defense or create an easy scoring opportunity on offense with their defense, or they're going to have to, special teams block a punt, take a return to the house. They cannot put their offense in a position where you just got to answer Patrick Mahomes drive for drive. The offense is not there right now, and if there's a route for the offense to be successful this year, it's got to be kind of a slow build, and there's just so much change with the new quarterback and the new starters they have there. The defense they're not going to carry the day against Patrick Mahomes, but they have to create some explosive plays on defense, and that is one flaw of Mahomes is sometimes he will get risky with the ball. Sometimes he will take a deep drop, which can result in a deep sack. They have got to make him pay on some of those, because if they're going to give up the quick game and the explosive game, they don't have the offense to answer it.
Offensively, you assume that they could use Taylor to try to bleed clock, keep the running game away from him, or keep the ball away from, kind of like keep away from Mahomes, essentially. But they have to block somebody. I know you went through the film on a, play-by-play basis. I kind of just looked at it in spurts. Offensive line has been awful. Highest paid offensive line in the league has been truly terrible through the first couple weeks, and not just at left tackle. In fact, we were talking before this podcast started about the matchup that Danny Pinter is going to have. He's got Chris Jones this week, and Chris Jones is good. He's one of the top 5 defensive tackles in the league. Chiefs are not going to let him rush against Quentin very often, because why would you? So that's a significant issue. There were several plays in that game that missed blocks by Pinter ended up leading to sacks or interceptions, or Ryan trying to get the ball out of his hand faster than he wanted to. And in the run game, it's going to matter too, because we just haven't seen them create seams for Taylor. I understand he had 9 carries, but he had no room to run at all in the first half of that game on Sunday. And until they get this offensive line fixed, nothing's going to get fixed. Until they start playing better, the offense has no shot. Ryan doesn't have a shot. Taylor is great, and somehow is averaging more than 5 yards a carry because of him, essentially. But you're not going to get the full effect of Jonathan Taylor until he has some holes to run through.
Yeah, when we process where we were wrong on this team, I think offensive line for me is the number one area, because the reason I was high on this team, and I still believe in this part of it, is I think Matt Ryan and Jonathan Taylor can be an incredible mix, because we know we know who Jonathan Taylor is, and that's a back Matt Ryan's not played with since maybe Michael Turner very early in his career. But now Matt Ryan's to the point in his career where he can work pre-snap and figure out places to go with the ball when they do stack the line. He's got to be helped out by everybody else, though. And if your offensive line is not going to play well, you will waste both of those players. And that's what's happening right now. Is there were moments in that game against the Jaguars where they'd run into an 8-man box. And last year they could do some of that. They can't do it right now. If you do an 8-man box against this team, whether it's Danny Pinter, whether it's Matt Pryor, whether it's the tight ends, they're not nailing their blocks enough. And it's hard to run against 8-man box. Why teams don't do it. The Colts leaned on it late last year. They didn't trust their passing game, and many times did well against that. And then obviously it didn't last forever. But they can't do that right now. And then the opposite happens where like they're not. They want to lean on that run game against the 8-man box because they can't beat them over the top without Michael Pittman Jr. They don't have that set up with the receivers, and the pass protection isn't there. They're not able to run anything more than a 3-step drop right now with some of the physical issues on the offensive line. It starts physical first, which is Matt Pryor dealing with speed, Danny Pinter dealing with strength. It's a bad combo because even if Matt Pryor does a decent job and secures that edge, which he did many times. He played better than I really thought that he did once I went back. The problem is there's nowhere to step up if your right guard is also getting pushed back into the quarterback. And a few times the center, Ryan Kelly, has not played as well as I thought that he would play. He's getting walked back. What happens right now is I thought that this offensive line would work out because the 3 stalwarts, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and Braden Smith, would elevate those other 2. The problem I think we're seeing is that Quentin Nelson is in his own stratosphere of he's just a totally different level of player. But Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith, while they're good players, they're not flawless players. They're not they have limitations that are getting overextended by what these other guys aren't doing. And that's Braden Smith's the length, and Ryan Kelly I think sometimes is just the sheer power. And if they've got to make up for the fact that for what the right guard's not doing on play after play, or they have to adjust all the time to stunts, and there's still going to be edge pressure because the tackle's not picking it up. That's where they're not overcoming this, and maybe they're not quite good enough to overcome it. They're still, I think Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith, I think, are in the right moments can look like fringe Pro Bowl players, but they're not so flawless that they can make up for just no performance from those other spots. And then Quentin Nelson's one guy, and one offensive lineman is never going to make up for all of it. And what you're also seeing is they just don't have trust with those guys around them. There were so many moments where it felt like Quentin Nelson was staying way too long on a certain combo block because he doesn't trust what's going to happen when he bails on that defensive tackle and leaves him for Matt Pryor to go up to a linebacker. That happened. Ryan Kelly, I saw that a lot with Danny Pinter. Braden Smith's not getting out. They had a screenplay early in the game to Heinz Heinz. Braden Smith's not getting out there that far for some of the same reason. They're not trusting the guys around them, and they're just being overextended. Until they fix that offensive line, though, none of this is going to get fixed.
I wonder if they're going to, we asked Marcus Brady if they're going to make changes on the offensive line. He said no. Number one, they might not make changes. So I want to say that first of all. Number two, Marcus Brady would not tell us. The coordinators typically do not give that kind of personnel thing unless it's by accident. And I don't think the Colts would tell us. They would prefer the Chiefs don't know, I would assume. That's not me predicting that they're going to make a change to the offensive line. I'm just saying that I don't know if asking Marcus Brady would be the best way to find that out if they were going to make a change in the offensive line. They tinkered with an alternate line in training camp with Bernard Raymond at left tackle, Quentin Nelson at left guard, Ryan Kelly at center, Braden Smith at right guard, and Matt Pryor at right tackle. At some point, I wonder if they're going to have to revisit that. It's not not that Pryor's playing well, but they clearly thought maybe there was something to that. They kind of downplayed it as just, trying to find something in case guys go down, but they were really only subbing out one player. I didn't see a bunch of Quentin contingency plans or that kind of thing. So I wonder if maybe you start revisiting that idea, just given the way they've played. I think it was 5 sacks on Ryan and 11 quarterback hits on Sunday. 7 sacks for Ryan through the first 2 games. They're so far ahead of their normal pace in terms of protection. The stunts and twists, it felt like they didn't pick up any of them. It's hard to talk about this team right now because everything has been so bad that like there's just nothing. There's nothing to count on. There's
Yeah.
nothing to bet on. There's nothing to assume they're going to do better because we haven't seen it.
Yeah, someone's got to overcome. I related a little bit to when I was covering the Lions in 2017. They had this combination of the offensive line was not protecting Matthew Stafford at all, and the receivers wouldn't separate. They were one of the worst separating receiver groups in the NFL, and it's this same combination of where like the offensive line's not giving them enough time to win when they can't separate naturally, and the receivers don't separate enough to make up for the misses. So what that team ended up fixing, they got really rolling, was they decided we're just going to throw quick, and we're not going to wait for separation. But Matthew Stafford had that chemistry built with Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, and they just made it work. They started to throw quick, and what that did though is over time it put less pressure on the offensive line, where they didn't feel like we've got to carry this, we got to save Matthew Stafford. It was like you only have to block now for a second or two. And then eventually once they got some of that confidence back in the offensive line and got guys comfortable, they were able to expand it out and just get a little bit better throughout the season. By the end of the year, they were a great, really, really good passing game. The issue right now is Matt Ryan does not have that built with his receivers, certainly not without Michael Pittman there to operate that way. And there were so many moments in that game I could tell he wanted to operate that way. There's a drop back in the red zone. He looks. Mo Alley Cox isn't open. Kylan Granson's not looking for the ball. There were just when Matt Ryan was holding the ball, there were moments of good pass protection. He's holding the ball because he's not trusting guys to either be open. They're either not open. A lot of times they're not open, but he also doesn't trust them to make the play if they're not open. And that's a lot of this that's happening right now. There were some plays I thought that play with Mo Alley Cox he could have thrown into the back of the end zone. Anyway, he was kind of a little bit open, but that was one snap after Mo Alley Cox didn't come down with a touchdown in the back of the end zone. This is the trust that's just not there. If he can get a couple of targets that he trusts, then I think they can start to move this somewhere. And Michael Pittman Jr. is huge for that. I think that is one guy that he's like, whether you look open or not. Safan Gilmore said that he's the only guy in this passing game that's open when he's not open. And that really matters in these situations, is that he had 9 catches against the Texans, and the reason they felt good about how that game progressed, because I think they got to a place late in that's how they came back, is they realized, like, we're going to make life easier in our offensive line by getting the ball quickly to Pittman, and it just like they started to get rolling. They can't get rolling if they don't have Michael Pittman Jr. out there right now, and then so everything fell back on Jonathan Taylor trying to make up for it, and that's where we learned the limitations of when a running back's your best player. There's only so many touches he's going to get, and there's only so many opportunities he's going to have early, and situationally to take advantage of this. So I know you wrote this week about getting Nyheim Hines more involved. I think that has to be a must, because at some point they just got to get guys they trust to get to the spots they need to get to, communicate, but also make a catch when you were covered. And one guy that I will say a positive, I thought they built that with last game, was Ashton Doolin. Did have some nice catches when he wasn't really open. I think he is really showing some good strides as far as making contested catches and adjusting to ball placement. Where he's got to get more together is there just for multiple miscommunications, because he hasn't played that much. He hasn't run all the routes they had in for Alec Pierce. And so, that creates a trust issue as well. So this was always going to be a process for Matt Ryan with the receivers. It's just magnified by the fact that the offensive line is not making up for it. They're not giving them that extra time to work through these things and build play by play. And what's happening is when you go 3 and out, then you're not using Jonathan Taylor either. And the offensive line is the key to everything right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting Taylor carries, I think a lot of people downplay the we weren't doing well on first and second down, but I mean, analytically, I know people hate that word, but I'm going to stick with it. Analytically speaking, you can't just run the ball on first and second down. You shouldn't run the ball on second and long very often. Almost never, really. You shouldn't run it on first down all the time either. So you need those. If you want to get Taylor carries, you need to have those first down plays, because you have to get yourself into running situations. You can't just. I mean, I know they did at the end of last year. They just kept hammering and hammering and hammering. But they haven't had that type of offensive line or running attack yet to do that. So Heinz to me, I just keep thinking we got so many issues with the receivers. They just need to hone in on the guys they feel like they can trust. Heinz has 10 catches and 11 targets so far. I'd lean into that as much as I could because, frankly, Paris Campbell had plenty of opportunity last week and didn't do anything with it in the slot. He really didn't do much in the Texans game either.
Harris part of this is really interesting because I went back to watch. He played 86% of the snaps and had 2 targets and 0 catches. And when I asked Frank Reich about it, he said it just situationally kept not working. Either he was not the primary read and they have to throw a primary read because of how quick they're going, or the defense is trying to take him away and force the ball elsewhere. And I saw a lot of that whenever he would run down the field. The Jaguars just seemed safety move there every time. They just weren't going to give up a big play to Paris Campbell. They were going to make the Colts go to Desmond Patman and Ashton Doolin and all these other guys who have even less track record, less frankly less athletic skills than Paris Campbell. Where Paris got open was a lot of underneath routes, but he was either the second read or a lot of situationally they didn't care to. The Jaguars were like, go ahead and take your 5-yard pass to Paris Campbell if you want, and Matt Ryan would go down the field because you're down 17-0 and you need to come back. So Paris didn't play a great game. There were moments where he just didn't look like he was running as confidently on some of these routes. I noticed he was sort of off balance a couple times in running it, and then there was one where he had a miscommunication late in a route that ended up in an interception. I think that was a moment that was late in the game, and this is the frustrating toll of this not working all game long, is you're just not as dialed in when the moment does arrive. He's a guy that I think they should have schemed up something to get the ball in his hands quickly. There are moments where you can draw up a play to get the ball's going to him, and if it's a 2-yard loss, it is, but at least get the ball in his hands. They didn't do that enough with the guy. I thought with the guys that they trust the most. Not that there's a lot of trust for Paris, but I still think you can trust the idea of the slot receiver who's got speed, that had a nice connection in camp with Matt Ryan to draw up some things. I think it just was a weird week where they were building a passing attack. They were building a game plan around Michael Pittman Jr., and he wasn't there. They adjusted it a little bit with the other guys that then stepped up and played in place of Pierce and Pittman, and they were going to use Paris' speed deep to kind of clear that open. Instead, I think they should have adjusted to get the ball more to Paris Campbell and see what happens. That's something they've got to work in more, because the guys they're going to, at least when they go to Desmond Patman and when they go to the tight ends, that just isn't – they're not delivering enough. They've got to try some other things, and yeah, it also starts with leaning on what you trust, which is Nyheim Hines.
Yeah, and until Campbell produces in a game, he's kind of in that unproven. He's in the stuff that's not working for me. Just so I would, you might have to lean a little bit more on Ashton Doolin. He's got 8 catches through 2 games, and in this,
I feel like that's what they're doing already.
As an outside guy, and honestly, that's as productive. I mean, it's not. Has it been great? No. I mean, he was responsible for the first interception, from everything we were told. But if you increase the role, give him more chances to, if you expand his role during the week, then maybe he makes less of those mistakes later. Emphasize Heinz. You got to go with what's working right now. And if you can get Campbell working, fine. We haven't seen it. Right? We haven't seen anything that looks like the first game of the 2020 season with Rivers in Jacksonville since he got hurt. Again, not his fault. Harrison Smith put his helmet on his knee, but even last year, he played. When he played, it was not very high volume in terms of targets, in terms of catches. There just hasn't been enough from him so far, and that coverages can roll that way, but at some point, you just got to be open and get some targets. And until that happens, it's hard to trust him.
See, I could disagree a little bit with the Doolin point, because I think the whole problem with this team is they're putting guys in roles they're not built for. I think Doolin, if you have guys like – a lot of these guys are capable in some fashion. I don't want this to come off like I think these guys can't play. The problem is and this is where I mostly blame their construction of the roster, is they moved guys up a level. So Mo Alley Cox, for example, I think is a perfectly capable number 2 tight end, and if he'll give you 3 catches for 31 yards a game and a first down, and that has some value, and he can block in certain situations. If he now has to do the Jack Doyle role in the run game, it's not working, and if he has to be a primary read in the red zone and he has to get open really quickly because you're not pass protecting, that's not going to work either. And I think Ashton Doolin's similar, is that he's made some really nice strides in terms of his route running and contested catches. I don't think turning that guy into a 10-catch type of receiver is a mode either, because I think you are going to have just enough of those issues where I would say, like, you can't give what you don't have, and what he doesn't have is game experience. What he doesn't have is the ability to read defenders and adjust on them and do all these things that nuanced receivers can do. He just doesn't have that. So to try and recreate it in week 3 of a season isn't really there. But at the same time, I mean, I know you're bringing that up because they don't have a lot of options. And, like, if there were better options here, they would be at them already. So what they've got to do is get Michael Pittman back on the field. It sounds like they sound optimistic he'll be back out there. We'll see once they're at practice. That is number one. That would solve a lot of things. But then, yeah, they have to – I think they've got to design some plays for – I think they've got to spread it around more than just Ashton Doolin, which was not happening in that game. And then, yeah.
Well, I'm not saying I want him to be the only receiver. I'm not saying I want him to play a Pittman role. I'm just saying I think you need to lean on the guys who've produced this season. And so far he's got 8 catches and Campbell has 3.
Yeah.
And Campbell's played more snaps. So that's just where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
And at some point the concept of the player has to turn into the player, and we just haven't seen it with Campbell. Now, if he does it next week, that's great, and move on the way you were going to. But at some point, the concept of the player has to turn into the actual production of the player, which is what we're not getting. For whatever reason, people taking it away, whatever, but I'm sure the Texans tried to take away Michael Pittman in the first game. He had 9 catches, So at some point, Campbell has to do it, and we just haven't seen him do it yet through the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think it's just the defense taking him away. There's just no trust this passing game. There's almost no moments when Matt Ryan went from on Sunday where he went from first read to second read. So if the guy's not the first read, he's not getting the ball. It doesn't matter if he's wide open. Doesn't matter if he's a little bit open.
Because he doesn't have time.
He doesn't have time, or he doesn't trust the time. There were moments when Matt Ryan would drop back and the first read was kind of open. But if you're kind of open in this offense, he's throwing it because he doesn't have this trust that I'm going to go to the second read and you will be more open, or that the pass protection will hold up so I can even do that. Like it just does not look like Matt Ryan trusts anything he's playing around at the moment. So they're having to just take what is there, and what is there is not enough right now. They don't have guys who are open immediately off the snap, or guys that when they get the ball in those situations are breaking tackles or making big plays. So they do have to find some ways to lean more on what they have, which is Nyheim Hines, Jonathan Taylor. And then obviously if Pittman does come back, he's just going to have to go right back in that role. He's going to have to catch 10 passes a game for what he's doing. If they want to have a chance against the Chiefs, it's because he's going to create some explosive plays. I just think there's got to be a trickle-down effect to leaning on those players, and then you can go to the other ones, the depth pieces, when it's their moment rather than force-feeding their moment. I wonder if we're going to see something more like the early Andrew Luck version of the offense where he was throwing it really fast all the time. Not down the field very much, not very high in terms of yards per attempt, but just they at that time they were still trying to find their offensive line in 2018 in the first 6 or 7 games. And I wonder if you do that now. You have to get Matt Ryan to play that way. Matt Ryan's time to throw has kind of been up and down over his career, but he's never really been like a Phillip Rivers-ish type 2.5 seconds and the ball's out guy. He's always been a little bit higher than that, a little bit more middle of the pack. So if you can get him to – but you might have to get him to do that just to protect him and get something out of the passing offense and try to do what the Jaguars just did to you. And just something to give him – something to neutralize the pass rush. Because right now it's so 5 quarterback sacks, 11 quarterback hits.
only one guy on the offensive line playing well. I really don't think it would matter if that player was playing at left tackle instead of left guard. I mean, Joe Thomas was great for the Browns for a really long time. I mean, like Hall of Fame level great at left tackle for the Browns, and they had bad lines because the other four were all terrible. So anytime you only have one on the line, you're in trouble. And that's really what all they have playing well right now is one on the line. So I wonder if maybe they try to go to a quicker passing game in order to to make up for that somehow. Try to get something going. Like you said, the Lions did it. The Lions did it where they were throwing quick, and maybe more rub routes. I mean, it depends on man coverage and stuff like that. But can you move to a quicker passing game to just in an admittance of how badly your offensive line is playing right now?
And in the process of that, you can build some confidence, and that's what this team needs, is these guys that are really hurting them are also guys who have not had a lot of success in the league yet. So they're trying to fight through that. And I've noticed that where some of the mistakes late in games, it's almost like I do think confidence is becoming an issue a little bit. So if they can throw quick and they can get some of these players a little bit more involved, a Kylan Granson and a Mo Alley Cox and guys like that, Paris Campbell, and then all of a sudden, if you're making your offensive line block for half as long as before, then there will be moments in a game where they have to have their moment, but they could be ready for that time. You could be ready, like Matt Pryor can be a little bit more ready for the one play he's got to drop and really seal the edge on Josh Allen rather than having to do it all the time. And I noticed that was one of the sacks that he gave up on Josh Allen. It just didn't seem like Matt Pryor was totally ready for that rush. He didn't overextend enough. It's like he forgot that this guy is that ridiculously fast around the edge that he starts in, and then his counter move is to dip outside, and you can't recover from that. So they've got to just, like I said, they got to decrease the volume for certain single pass catchers on offense. You also have to decrease the number of plays your offensive line has to win. Again, this is not an ideal situation. I thought we'd be in a spot where the offensive line, you could lean on them a little bit. You can't lean on them right now. They've got to be able to build that, and all offenses will gain confidence if they can get off one long drive, if they can get just to see the ball, go from quarterback to receiver to first down to this will really start to build this, and that's how you get these reps to then go back in the film room, look over and build upon it, where it's, okay, now we want to move this beyond just quick passes to not just 3-step drops, but to 5-step drops. They just have to build incrementally, and so I think the quick game is absolutely the best way they can at least start to build that.
We've kind of focused on the football of it, the coaching points, that kind of thing, but it's worth going back just for the last couple of minutes of the podcast and just reminding and saying again that a lot of these issues stem to decisions that Chris Ballard, the general manager, made during the offseason. Not signing a veteran receiver, not bringing back somebody. You could have had, there were guys you could have had for not very much who are experienced in this league, who understand quick game, understand adjustments, reading defenses. It didn't have to just be T.Y. Hilton. There were lots of other guys who didn't go for very much money. They could have signed a tight end. They could have signed a tight end who's a better receiver. That's something Frank Reich has wanted for a long time. They could have signed a better stopgap at left tackle. They could have added more competition, or maybe you couldn't get back Chris Reed because he didn't feel like he could start. But you could sign another guard. Where's the next Chris Reed? They didn't sign a guy like that to really challenge for that spot.
What I think about is that Matt Pryor was at right guard.
There's all these, which is something he's actually played, as opposed to left tackle. All of those spots. If you add more experience there, maybe you're not in the position you're in now at 0-1-1, which feels like 0-6, honestly, the way this week is going, and feeling like you don't have a whole lot of answers. So it's just an important point to remember. All of this stuff is going on. All of this is the product of decisions the front office made in the offseason. To not go get proven talent and to focus on younger players.
And the thing is, front office executives aren't perfect either. And he was, Chris Ballard can have a miss here or there. It's going to happen. The problem is it's all three of those positions are combining, is left tackle, wide receiver, and tight end. If there was one of those that we were sitting here saying they should have addressed more, but the others weren't, the others were adequate, we would not be having this conversation. If Matt Ryan had a tight end he trusted right now, I'd let a lot more of the wide receiver stuff slide. He would have something to lean on. If he had the left tackle, so they have this pretty good offensive line, you know, they could work through some of the issues at wide receiver and tight end and build these guys and you know, drop plays to better get them in situations. It's just all combining. Football's the most team game ever, and so those three positions are just creating an issue where the quarterback can't work through it because all of them, he doesn't know where to go or what to lean on when all of them are a problem. And I think about, you know, that's where just a couple of moves could have changed this. And we think about like left tackle. When I look back, outside of signing Teron Armstead and just dumping wild money, it was going to be hard to solve that this offseason. But the move that I think still lingers out there was the year before that when they chose to sign Eric Fisher, when they could have signed Charles Leno. And if they signed Charles Leno and he's a capable, solid left tackle, that's the guy you're re-signing to be your left tackle, not Matt Pryor. All of a sudden, Matt Pryor is competing with Danny Pinter to be a right guard, and the best guy is going to win. That competition can bring out the best in guys. Matt Pryor, I think in this scenario, would be your starting right guard because it doesn't look like Danny Pinter has it. But what that means is then Danny Pinter is a very good backup center and right guard, which is what made us feel better about the offensive line a year ago. There's just such a trickle effect to these moves, or really the lack thereof of these moves. And if it was just one of them, if that same hole had existed left tackle, but they had, you know, like a Hayden Hurst or an Austin Hooper at tight end, and they had like a Jarvis Landry at wide receiver, they could play around that. All the suggestions we're making about throwing quick or all this stuff, it's just a lot harder when both of them are a problem. And I really trust Frank Reich, Marcus Brady, Matt Ryan, Nick Foles, the game planning element. They know all this stuff. But the problem is it's just hard to find solutions when there's too many areas that are holding them back. And it's just going to come back to the fact that some of these guys that are in new positions have got to play better, and they've got to come up with a game plan that builds their confidence a little bit to get them to at least like if you can get some of these players to their 70th percentile outcome, you know, that we can work around a little bit more. But if they're going to play like it looks like their second game starting at positions and they're just overwhelmed, that's where when you get all those performances at three critical positions, that's where you end up getting shut out.
And, I mean, we're talking about the offense, so we didn't even get into the fact that, you know, Ballard's fingerprints are all over the lack of depth in the defensive line, too. All of the draft picks that haven't materialized, haven't turned out the way they were supposed to. I get that it's hard to find pass rushers outside the first round, but if you use 4 second-round picks and a third, I think I'm getting that right, on pass rushers, you got to hit 1 or 2 of them. Just have to. And outside of the very low bar of a second-round pick being a rotational depth piece, none of them have really hit that. So that's how you get to where you are, where, you know, I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell exactly how hurt DeForest Buckner is. I think pretty hurt, considering he didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday last week. And they have to keep asking him to play a full load because they don't have anybody who can do it. There's not much speed outside of Ngakoue off the edge because Ben Bandigu has never developed. Like those draft picks have not turned out, and so you don't have the defensive line. How many times have we heard Chris Ballard? I've heard it way more than you have because you haven't been on the beat as long. But he says every offseason, every time we talk to him, 8 or 9, 8 or 9, 8 or 9, 8 or 9, and every year it's been 5. And at some point that's got to change.
This is the second straight time I've noticed, second straight year that the defensive coordinator has pretty much said exactly that. I want 8 or 9 guys. We don't
Bradley
have
said
8
it
or
all
9
offseason.
we trust.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's really the thing is like teams will tell you coaches will tell you what they believe about a player based on how they use them. So when these guys aren't getting on the field, Ben Bandigu barely playing, that tells you what they're seeing in practice is not impressive enough.
And we didn't see it in training camp.
And we didn't see training camp.
We didn't see much from Ben Bandigu in training camp.
And we haven't seen it in games. Like they're just at some point, yeah, if it keeps not going, they'll get a chance because you're going to have to you got to mix it up and try different stuff. But it's just problematic.
Or because the frontline guys are going to get hurt like Buckner is, and they're going to have to play him.
It's problematic to be in this spot where you don't trust a third or fourth year second round pick at defensive end. That's just a bad. Not every guy. It is hard to find like star pass rushers out of the first round, but you can find complementary pieces. And if some of these were just working together, where a Banogu or a Taekwon Lewis or Dio Adangbo, if those guys just kind of added moments, this would look a lot different. And all of a sudden, those would be the complementary pieces to Yannick Ngakoue and DeForest Buckner, and this could look really good. And that's some of the best defenses out there. I think about like the Denver Broncos when they won with Peyton Manning. They had Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware, but they had so many guys that hit that 4 or 5 sack level, and they just could funnel them in, and the offense had no idea what to do with them. Instead, you end up not having any of that depth, puts pressure on Ngakoue to do it, and Buckner. And so when Buckner's hurt, you feel it so much right now. Like when he's not blowing up that line, it just feels like there's not very much rush, which is how it felt last year. I thought this would be different, is that I know, and I still think Ngakoue will show up this year. He's shown up every year and had 8+ sacks. It will come along, but the problem is that alone isn't the answer to everything. He alone isn't going to key a great pass rush when DeForest Buckner's banged up if those other ends aren't performing, and right now they're not performing.
Well, and like in terms of, I know it's harder to find pass rushers outside the first round. It is possible. I mean, and it's possible to find guys who are able to contribute while developing. Trey Hendrickson is a very good example. Saints took him in late in the third round when I was still covering them. The first couple of years, Trey Hendrickson, he wasn't great, but he could play 200-ish snaps and be productive, and he would usually have one game or two where he would make a significant impact. The Colts didn't even have that from these guys. I mean, eventually he broke out later, even more so with the Bengals. But they don't even have guys doing that in that second and third round. Another guy that I remember from that, with Saints are a team that has had a good defensive line. David Onyamata was a 4th-round pick and never been a star, but he has games where he plays a lot and is very impactful in the pass rush. The Colts don't have guys doing that. The only guy who's ever done that really in his career is Taekwon Lewis, and he's playing a lot right now, not producing like most of them, but he's the only guy out of that group who's had that. I mean, Kemoko Toure had that. He's not here anymore, so that's why we're not talking about him. And they let him go in the offseason. So the lack of depth on the defensive line, the decisions on the offensive line, receiver decisions, tight end decisions, everything that they decide, kicker, we didn't have to worry about it last week, but kicker, all of these things where they kind of decided to stand pat and try to build through the draft instead of adding somebody else, it's all biting them right now.
Yep.
Every single one of them has gone wrong. And really everything has gone wrong for this Colts team, but every single offseason decision has gone horribly bad so far. And that's why they are where they are.
A lot of mistakes from Chris Ballard that we've seen show up so far, and that's why we're pointing them out. At the same time, though, this is on everyone right now, and it's on the players too, to a point, is that like while those defensive linemen need to play better and need to show up, they can't have the free releases at cornerback that we've seen right now. They're paying too much to Safan Gilmore and Kenny Moore, and they're playing Brandon
Colts
Faison.
thought they would be very good at corner.
Yeah.
I heard that several times during training camp. They have not shown that at all.
And they've not shown it. And so what I think about it is that that overtime series against the Texans, Kwity Paye, finally, that was like what everyone was waiting on, that guy who's not a Buckner Ngakoue who just has his moment. Kwity Paye, amazing couple of rushes in there, and he built confidence even though it didn't end up winning the game. But they didn't build on that at all because they get out the next week and the ball's out in 2 seconds, and Kwity Paye's not into a flow. And he had a couple of decent, okay rushes against Lawrence eventually, but at that point, they're just overextended a little bit where he's trying to dominate off the snap to get back there quick enough, which is not Kwity Paye's game. This is not the most blow-you-away athlete off the snap. He's more of a – I think he showed some great moves, new moves in that series against the Texans that he didn't get to do anything with how quick the throws were against the Jaguars. So just like on offense, like some part of the defense is going to have to lift the others. And I'm putting it on the cornerbacks right now because those are the guys who are supposed to be good and I think are good, or I still believe that Kenny Moore and
have been good.
Safan Gilmore, that was a little bit weird. I really liked him against how he played against the Texans, and then last week it just wasn't just letting too much of a cushion and not tackling very well. So those guys have to step up, and I throw Brandon Faison in that too. If he's going to take every single snap and Isaiah Rodgers can't get on the field, you need to cash in on that. So
I feel like they got to play Rodgers this week. It'll be if they don't play Rodgers this week. I mean, we've asked about it to Bradley 2 weeks in a row, and before that even we were asking about his usage. If he doesn't play this week against this team with his speed, honestly, they're lying to us about everything they keep saying about Rodgers, because when I talked to Ron Miles, he threw him in there with the top 4 corners in training camp, and Bradley keeps saying he's practicing. Well, put him on the field. Nothing else is working. Yeah. Put him on the field. Kenny Moore is struggling right now and hurt.
And I know why
put him on the field.
I know why they're not playing him is that Gus Bradley feels like he's in a tough spot right now where the scheme is not translating the way they want it to. So he feels like he's got to have one of the guys out there who knows the scheme like the back of his hand, which is Brandon Faison, who's played it with the Chargers and with the Raiders. And so he's got to be the guy in the field to help move this forward. But that has to work, or else he gets he starts to lose a little bit of confidence in the group on this whole message. If it starts to look like you're not playing the best guys, that becomes problematic. So at the very least, they need to create a rotation, because Isaiah Rodgers, while he may not be, the prototype that Gus Bradley would build in a lab with the length and and the experience in that system, like, he has ball skills that I think are pretty undeniable at this point. He picked off 11 passes in college. He picked off 3 last year, which is 1 off the team lead, even though he only started 1 game. Against Buffalo, the last time we saw him on the field in the preseason game, had played 9 snaps, forced 2 turnovers.
You weren't here yet, but in the playoff game against Buffalo, he almost picked off Josh Allen. And that was in like 10 snaps.
And then even in training camp, there was a moment like Ashton Doolin, I think, had the best play of camp where he kind of stole the ball out of the air from Isaiah Rodgers. And I'll always remember Isaiah's sitting there on the ground staring at his hands like, how did I not get that? Because that's how he plays. It's all recovery speed. It's a lot of how a young Darius Slay played when I covered him in Detroit. That's a high ceiling, and turnovers are just so huge right now. And so if these other things aren't working,
any defensive back's hand on a football would be huge right now. Any defensive back's hand on a football.
And the guy who is best at coming down with the ball, I think most naturally gifted at it, is a guy playing 0 snaps, and that's a problem.
We are getting close to the time when we have to get to the Colts facility. Bleak podcast, but again, that's all we have right now. So I'll finish with this. That's a reminder to Colts fans, based on what we've seen so far. If your cabinet looks like this, you have 3 days to make a run. For the Colts Cover 2 podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins.